Hello and welcome to a new podcast from WeThe15, the biggest ever human rights movement aiming to end discrimination of persons with disabilities, who make up 15% of the world's population. WeThe15, Access All Areas, is made by the same team behind A Winning Mindset Lessons from the Paralympics, which was the award-winning official podcast of the International Paralympic Committee. My name is Andy Stevenson, I'm a sports broadcaster, and I happen to have a disability myself. Join me in this new series as we take a look at society and investigate how attitudes can be changed to create more opportunities for persons with disabilities, as well as improving representation and amplifying a range of diverse voices. As you may know, the WeThe15 campaign is intrinsically linked to the Paralympic movement. So on the eve of the Paris Paralympic Games, it's only right that we have an episode all about my favourite subject, sport. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Andrew Parsons, the president of the International Paralympic Committee since 2017, and the unmistakable Tatyana McFadden, a true legend of the Paralympics, with 20 medals across 5 summer and 1 winter games. If we can go back and sort of reflect on the time around when you were adopted and you were taken to the USA by Deborah McFadden, how quickly did sport become a big factor in your life?
Yeah, so I didn't have a typical childhood growing up, and being adopted from St. Petersburg, Russia at the age of 6.5, had a lot of first things happen. And one of them was surgeries. I had several surgeries growing up because my legs were atrophied behind my back and I needed to sit in a regular chair, in a wheelchair, like lay flat in a bed. And it's about 10 surgeries doing that. And I started school for the very first time. And what really, altered my life was getting involved with a parasports program in Baltimore called the Bennett Blazers. And at the time, my parents got onto the internet and they researched a great sports program that I could be part of, because they knew at the time, kids are thrown into sports to learn a lot of things, and they're learning about, teamwork and goal setting, and they're also being active and healthy. And so my parents wanted the same exact thing. So we did that research. But what I noticed by being involved with the sports program was that I was getting healthy, and not just physically healthy, but mentally healthy. And so sports really taught me, outside of the box. And, after several years of playing wheelchair basketball, ice hockey, downhill skiing, table tennis, swimming, and wheelchair racing, I really took to wheelchair racing and wheelchair basketball. And then that took a turn for me when I was 15.5.
What you're talking about here in terms of your parents seeing sport as a way of giving you various qualities in life, sort of personality traits, as well as all the fitness and everything that goes with it, that was never necessarily to become a Paralympian, was it? That was just because they saw the benefits of you playing sport. And I hear this so often from disabled people that I just want to play sport to have fun or to get fit. I'm not trying to become a Paralympian. So back when you were a teenage Tatyana McFadden, it wasn't that you were trying to become a Paralympian then, was it?
Not at all. I mean, when I started sports, and especially like in wheelchair basketball, I couldn't even catch the ball right. I would always get hit in the face. And, for when I tried wheelchair racing, I remember it like it was yesterday. Just I was learning how to get into it, and I was learning about holding racing gloves, and I was just learning about, the stroke of the chair. And that took me a long time to get down. But I loved the community that I was in. I really loved my coaches growing up. And, they just taught me there's a lot of value in sports. And we always broke down sports as, a goal setting. Maybe one week I would go up and down the pool, twice. And then the following weekend I would come back and maybe I would go up and down 4 times. So we always, had goals in mind that I could reach that were very, very reachable. It wasn't set out to be a Paralympic athlete at all. Looking at me back then, there was no way that you would see me competing in the Paralympics one day. That dream came much later on, around 2003 and 2004, when on TV and newspapers, before we had social media, they were talking about the Athens Games.
And just before I bring Andrew Parsons in, Tatyana, just tell us about a particular period when inclusion wasn't actually there for you. You and your parents had to fight to enable you to compete on the same track as your non-disabled friends and peers. Just tell us about that and how that led to Tatyana's law in the States.
Yes. So I'm going to give you a perspective of a 15-year-old girl going through this. I had arrived home from the Paralympic Games with a silver and bronze medal. And I was excited to join high school because all I wanted to do was to be part of the track team. And as a 2-time Paralympic medalist, I thought, I would be welcomed with open arms. But that wasn't really the case for me. So when I was allowed to join the track team, I was denied a uniform and denied the right to race alongside of others on the track. And at that age, I was just devastated. And so with my mom at my side, we brought suit against Howard County, Maryland, not for money, but for the right to be treated equally in sports. But our victory resulted in the creation of a new law. It's called the Sports and Fitness Equity Act. And it's been embraced nationwide, forever changing the face of high school athletics. And it's giving young people with disabilities the right to be fully equal in the world of sports in high school. And at that time, that lawsuit was so important to me at the age of 15 because almost overnight, I learned how powerful my voice could be. I guess you couldn't say overnight. It was many, many years. But I learned, that I was an advocate. And coming home from the Paralympics, I could use my voice and use it for the greater good. And I wanted to go through with this because at this point it was, a decade without anything happening before me. And I have a younger sister, Hannah, who's also a Paralympic athlete. And we were the first sisters to compete in London and Rio together. But I said, if I'm being denied this opportunity, she will 100% be denied this opportunity. And this pattern will continue for probably as long as I could live. And so I wanted to put an end to it and wanted to stop this pattern and to really change that conversation. It was hard as a 15-year-old, but I was so lucky at that age that I really found out quickly my why in sports, which led me even further into my career.
And Andrew, listening to Tatyana's story there of having to fight to be able to wear the same uniform and race on the same track as the non-disabled children in her year group and at her school and college. I mean, this is exactly the kind of thing that the WeThe15 campaign, the Paralympic Games, the Paralympic Committee, and yourself personally have been fighting to change.
No, exactly. I think Tatyana made so many good points in what she was saying. First of all, saying that sport allowed her to dream being whoever she wanted to be and to do whatever she wanted to do. And this, I think, it's so important. And she fought to be able to practice sport together with her mates. And even though today may sound unbelievable, but this was the reality. And we're talking about the US, a very advanced country. So can you imagine what happens in the four corners of the world? And yes, this is the reason why we started WeThe15, because we believe that the Paralympic movement and sport probably is the Paralympic Games is the best platform or on the planet probably to give voice to athletes with disability, but to persons with disability. And as you said, Andy, some of them want to practice sport just for fun, for leisure, for whatever. But it's often the case that any person with disability practicing sport is seen, he's a Paralympian. No, it's not. And they have the right to not to be. And this is the thing. They have people with disability, anyone in the world should have the right to practice sport. And when this is denied, When I first read and about the story of the Tatyana law, I was so proud that an athlete and the family of an athlete took that initiative to fight. But WeThe15 is a campaign to try to avoid having to fight in that sense, is to create awareness in people about the rights of persons with disability. And it's so simple, Andy, because I think the first part of that, and it was launched right prior to Tokyo, was just to give the information to the remaining 85% of the population, that 15% of global population has a disability. And this is 1.2 billion people. So, you cannot ignore 1.2 billion people. It's too many people to be ignored. But still, there's a long way to go here. I think we're just scratching the surface with what we can do with the Paralympic movement.
WeThe15 has a much broader scope than just sports, of course. So how did you feel about the campaign when you first heard about it, when in fact you were helping to shape it? Because for a sports organisation to try and take on something that's broader than sport is a brave step. Was there any nervousness there, for example?
Yes, and I can tell you a very quick story, Andy, about how I changed my own perception about Paralympic movement. I was already 20 years in the movement, so I was running to become the IPC president. So this is 2017, and I attended a UN event. I went there by invitation of a quadriplegic Colombian friend called Juan Pablo Salazar, who is an activist for the rights of persons with disability. So he brought me to that event, and after 3 days, he came to me and said, "How are you feeling?" And I said, "I am uncomfortable." And he said, "Why are you uncomfortable?" I said, "Look, I spent 20 years of my life in the Paralympic movement. I don't know any of this. I don't know about the movement of the fight for the rights of persons with disability. And we have the best platform on earth to support this. So we do have a responsibility here, and we're not doing anything with it." And then he smiled, he looked at me and said, "Now you're ready to be the IPC president." And that completely changed the way I see Paralympic sport. And that started the third pillar, as we call in the IPC. We started a different approach. And then we had the idea of the WeThe15. So there was some nervousness and even some top athletes. And I think, Tatyana, you are a top athlete, and you have many colleagues, friends, and you live with them. Many of them, they were against. I remember a particular forum, athletes forum in Colorado Springs, when we were sharing with athletes reps from all over all countries in the world, from all the sports, about our plans to get more involved. It was not even WeThe15 yet. It was just, look, we will be more involved with the human rights movement for persons with disability. And there was some criticism coming in from the athletes. Say, no. We should remain an elite sport organization. We should remain an elite sport organization. And then, of course, we were able to explain. So, look, you're a top athlete now. You have sponsorship and so. But remember 20 years ago when you started, or 15 years ago, or when you have acquired your disability, or if you were born with disability, when you first got aware of the fact that you had a disability. So that helped to make some of the athletes that they were against in favor. And that was the idea, yes, behind WeThe15. And yeah, there was some nervousness. Are we doing the right thing? Are we stepping into something that, do we know enough about it? But then we found some good organizations to work with, like ADA. And I think, we found a very good way of working together. And again, the only event of global impact that put persons with disabilities center stage, sport, in art, in culture, economics, whatever, is the Paralympic Games. So it's not only that I believe in it, but it is a responsibility as well. We have to do it.
It's a huge responsibility. I mean, do either of you sometimes feel, in a way we shouldn't be having to do this? This should be politicians or, the world of business or other areas of life. Why are we as, sports administrators, sports people having to sort of bear this huge responsibility of changing the world, basically?
So I guess for me, I'll have a different perspective from Andrew, but I live with it day to day. And when I had to sue my high school and when I had to sue for opportunity, it was just such an eye opener that if I don't do it, then who else will? But it also takes bravery to advocate, not only for Paralympics, but for the people with disabilities in our own communities. So I really do believe, if we bring equality into our sport, like we have in the US, we can bring equality down to our own communities, job opportunities, as we can see, for the US. London Marathon was a great example this year. We finally received equal pay as of prize money this year. And so when they set that stage and when they set that, precedence, they're saying something out loud. And I really hope that when that happened at the London Marathon, then they can go back at their own communities and say, someone could say, hey, well, how come I'm a person with a disability? How come I'm not being paid the same as my coworker? And I'm doing the same exact job. We're putting in the same exact hours. We're doing the same commute. And so it's really important to, someone has to be, the start of the conversation. And then hopefully, people will follow. Just like how the Paralympics originated, right? We took that one person and then the rest followed.
Andrew, your thoughts on this huge responsibility that you have, and whether sometimes you feel like, why is this all on our shoulders?
The first time I was exposed to Olympic, Paralympic sport, it was in a way that I understood that sport is more than just in brackets, of course, gold, silver, and bronze, that sport can really change lives. At that time, it was on the Olympic side, it was more making people overcome poverty here in Brazil and things like that. So I do accept the responsibility, to be honest with you. What we don't want is that only the sport movement accepts its responsibility. So, for example, the Paralympic Games is why it's so powerful. Well, why sport is so powerful? Because you don't need to explain it, right? You see it, you feel it, and interacts with your own values, the things you have learned through your whole life, and then it changes you in your own unique way. It's not someone preaching to you for over 1 hour about the rights of persons with disability or their potential, what they can do. So the Paralympic Games and the Paralympic sport movement, it's about also showing to the world that if given opportunity, persons with disability can do whatever they want. But we don't want this only to be in sport, only in the Paralympic Games. Sir Ludwig Guttmann, and 70-something years ago, he used to say, we want every disabled person on the planet to become a taxpayer, meaning citizenship. Yes, maybe in an ideal world, we should not be having to deal with these issues as a sport organization. But I do think this should be a joint effort of society. So as a leader of a sport organization, I do accept and understand that we have this role to play. What we want is to try to make, and this is the spirit behind WeThe15. We want the private sector, we want government, we want civil society, we want everyone to understand that they also have a responsibility. So, I'm not afraid of taking the responsibility. I'm nervous about taking the responsibility alone, meaning it's only the Paralympic movement. It can't be the Paralympic movement alone. So that's why, impacting 164 nations in Paris in the summer is so important.
Andrew, was part of the thinking behind WeThe15 to have a constant impact? Because, one of the things that sometimes said about the Paralympic Games, and this brings in things like media coverage and all sorts of things, but it has an impact for a few weeks, a month, a couple of months perhaps. It maybe has a big impact on the city, the host city, for a little while. And then that bubble kind of bursts again, and we have to sort of start up again somewhere else. So was some of the thinking behind WeThe15 to have a more ongoing impact?
Yes, definitely, because it cannot be only the Paralympic Games. Sport is a good metaphor. It's visible. As I said, you don't have to explain it. But yes, the idea was that we will also have events outside the world of sport, or campaigns or initiatives, so that from different angles, we could touch on the various points to make our societies more inclusive for persons with disability. Employment is such an important issue. Employment and equal payment, as Tatyana has mentioned, for example. Why you pay less to someone with a disability for the same job or for the same athletic achievement, for example? It doesn't make any sense. So yes, that's the idea. It's to be more permanent and to be. The thing with WeThe15 is that sometimes we were seen a little bit like we could solve everything. So now you will start to deal with the tax on assistive devices in South America. That's not what we aim for. We cannot go that far as IPC. That's why we will need to bring governments together. When we say governments, is also the parliaments, the legislative power, and change laws in the countries, for example.
Do you think there are enough people with disabilities in senior roles across sports. So I'm not talking as athletes now, I'm talking about the people who organise and shape all different sports around the world. Are there enough people with disabilities in senior roles?
Of course not. I don't think we have enough in the Paralympic movement, not to mention other sports movements. We have 8 Paralympians out of 14 people. It's a good number. But this is not, let's say, something that is guaranteed. It's not an obligation. It's not mandatory. It could be that in the next election, we will have 14 non-disabled persons. Of course, that's not good. But this is at the IPC level. We need to cascade that down to all of our stakeholders, from the National Paralympic Committees and international federations, and international federations that are Olympic and Paralympic. So, why do we have an international federation that in the crucial positions, all of them, they don't have a disability? Just the chair of the Para Sport Commission has a disability. Why persons with disability cannot contribute to able-bodied sport, for example? So yes, and offer them a fresh view on sport, not only in para sport or in sport in general, on the role of sport. So even in the Paralympic movement, we are behind. So can you imagine outside of the Paralympic movement?
Tatyana, when you just go about your daily life, so I'm not talking about sport here, athletics, wheelchair racing at all, being a Paralympic legend, just Tatyana as an ordinary citizen in the USA, do you see more disabled people? I mean, this is such a general question. Do you see more disabled people around, working in senior positions?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I don't. I definitely don't see people with disabilities working in senior positions. And, wherever I go for speaking or, whomever sponsorships I have, they always say, what can we do? And I always say, have a person with disability intern, hire a person with a disability. Next time, that's what I want to see, for the future. And I always mention that. I always mention that statement because, I do want to see more people with disabilities employed, in certain executive positions because, we can do it. When the film Rising Phoenix came about, the discussion was employment of people with disabilities to work on the film. I would be so ashamed if we came out with this film and we didn't have a single person with disability working on it. Like, that would go completely against what I was saying. And it's been amazing, how, producers and how everyone from the film industry, learned from the people with disabilities, how finding accessible, workplace was really hard in the UK. The transportation was quite difficult. So there was a lot of just learning processes, even in the last, 5 years, just about that. So I would like to see just definitely more employment. I mean, even, if I go to a school, I don't see a person with disability being a teacher. And it wasn't easy for me as being a student and doing 600 hours of internship. I got denied a lot of places because of my disability. But, when I found a spot that really accepted me, it was a learning curve because, they hadn't had worked with someone with a disability. So, it was being vulnerable and having those open discussions. I think a lot of people are also afraid about offending someone with a disability, when they are employing them. But, for COVID as well, it was a blessing that also people can work online. And so if I got interviewed on Zoom, you don't really see that I have a disability, right? And so hopefully that brought more employment if people are, having to work, on online jobs. That I do hope happened, but we still can do a lot more.
Is this kind of advocacy, as you call it, Tatyana, something that you intend to keep going, for the rest of your life?
Absolutely. I think it's just definitely part of, who I am. And it's been such a great change, being advocate in the sport and my community. And, it's gutsy to be an advocate and to really talk things in the open, but it's for a good reason. And I just, there's so many athletes before me that have paved the way. I mean, if you believe it or not, in Paralympic sport, we weren't allowed to stay in the village. So the athletes before me like advocated for that and, sued against it so we could stay inside the village. And we've come a long way in just that. And then as of, our own communities, it's really important to continue to be that advocate as well, because we still have problems today, where people want, to answer questions or to have that open conversation. So absolutely, probably for the rest of my life, I will always be an advocate.
Andrew mentioned a few moments ago about some athletes were nervous and actually against the concept of WeThe15, or certainly against the idea that a sporting organisation should be pushing all of these buttons. Could you understand that attitude? Could you sort of empathise with why some athletes might have felt that way?
Well, so from my understanding for the WeThe15, again, it's about starting the conversation about disability, because there's a big misconception on the education piece of disability globally, not just, in certain countries. I mean, it's a global problem. And, oftentimes people think disability is a taboo. Like what I faced in high school, people wanted to segregate me because they didn't really understand disability in general. And it wasn't just me that was being, segregated in high schools. It was a lot of students being segregated in high schools. And so it's about bringing that conversation and really educating society on what disability is and what we can do. Because even today, when I'm still going around in public, my disability is visible and people still think of the things they can't do. And I really hope that people, kind of understand it from that view of perspective, and that athletes' voices are much stronger than just one voice. We really do need a collective group of voices to really empower their own communities. So I hope that people can see it from that point of view, because that's kind of, how I saw it.
Do you think the vast majority of disabled sports people, just like non-disabled sports people, are incredibly driven and focused on winning their medals, winning their titles, breaking records, etc., that I guess it's understandable if some of them wanted to say, do you know what, I'm going to focus on my sport whilst I am competing. And then perhaps afterwards, when I've retired, that's when I will talk about my disability a little bit more. That's when I will get involved in campaigns, etc.
I definitely, do see that, being an athlete is a 9-to-5 job. And it really is a 9-to-5 job. You have to, you have doubles, you got to work on recovery, you got to work on eating, you're trying to hustle for sponsorships. If you, don't have people paying your country, and it's very hard being a Paralympic athlete. That is a full-time job, just trying to be a Paralympic athlete. There were moments, you have to be really creative on how you're going to survive as a Paralympic athlete. Not just winning out there, winning medals, but having a roof over your head, supporting your family, travel finances, equipment finances, maybe supporting your family, and then, food on top of that. So there's a lot of things involved. It is stressful being a Paralympic athlete. I could see that, I could see being an advocate would be a lot later. But what most Paralympians, should know is that, you are just being an advocate by just going out and training on the track or going to your local gym, because people do see that and they're like, oh, wow, like that's pretty cool. They may ask you a few questions, and then you told your story, and then they'll tell that person, that person will tell your story to another person. So that part, has a really powerful effect.
Can I add something here, Andy? Because
go for it, yeah.
As Tatyana has mentioned, they must be aware that even competing, even when they are training, even when they are going out there in their own communities, practicing sport, whether they like it or not, they are advocates, even in a passive way. And this is a responsibility. You may not want to engage in events, in campaigns, or be a public speaker, but I think you need to be aware, and this is one of the things that we are trying to do through different programs, and also WeThe15 makes all of the athletes to understand that they are part of that, whether they like it or not, in changing the world. But you are not obliged to take a leadership position. You decide where you're comfortable, but understanding that you are part of that, whether you like it or not. So, as Tatyana was saying, and of course you can be a super high-level advocate. I have a suggestion for you, Tatyana. By the way, after your retirement, you should still be an advocate, and why not be even more involved with the Paralympic movement in a different level? Who knows? Maybe in Bonn, Germany.
The podcast has become a job interview all of a sudden. So.
Perfect.
It's just because it's so great to have athletes of the caliber of Tatyana involved with the IPC. Tatyana comes from a generation of athletes that became household names in their own countries, their communities, but at international level as well. And to see that caliber of athlete involved with the IPC or the Paralympic movement in general, if in a different perspective or capacity, I think it will be incredible for the movement and for what we're trying to achieve with campaigns like WeThe15.
I'll put something to you, Andrew, here. Whilst I absolutely agree that an organisation such as WeThe15 or the International Paralympic Committee should have a large disabled representation, I actually think it's remarkable that a lot of these changes have been pushed by yourself and other colleagues who don't have a disability. I think actually when people who don't have a disability do so much to try and change the world for people who do, that's just as powerful as having an entire board made up of disabled people.
I know that I don't have a disability that will make me eligible to become a Paralympian, not to mention the sport talent. But and I don't see the world as having to be anything in the world having to be exclusive for persons with disability, for able-bodied, for male, female, I don't know, people from one religion, from another religion, from one sex orientation, from one ethnicity. I think we should be all together. I happen to be a guy without a disability leading the Paralympic movement. Why can't we have someone living with a disability as president of an international able-bodied federation one day or president of the IOC? Like, I don't want to be labeled as the non-disabled guy president of the APC. I'm just a person who fell in love with this movement 27 years ago, and I want to give my contribution. Yes, it happens that now I am the president, and I do understand the issue of representation. Don't get me wrong, I do understand, and I think that maybe a former athlete could do that bit much better than I can do, obviously. But there are some parts of the job and some parts of being the IPC president that are also important. And maybe now in this moment, in the balance of things, our membership decided, that I should be in that role. But it would be incredible to have someone who will have, the whole thing, the whole package, and has been an incredible Paralympian, a superstar, gold medal winner, and so that would be incredible. I think we are getting there. And maybe I could be the last president without a disability. Who knows?
The reason I bring that up is because that is part and parcel of taking a wider audience with you, isn't it? Along on any kind of journey. And like you, WeThe15 has to take people who've had no experience of disability up to this point along with it. Otherwise, it won't work.
I think one of the problems, and speaking with what I call the human rights movement for persons with disability, is that normally they used to preach to the converted. They talk about inclusion. They talk about within their own communities, and I think that's what we bring to the table as well. The Paralympic Games that we impacted in Tokyo, 4.1 billion persons in accumulated audience, and these people, many of them, they don't have a disability, they are not involved with disability, they don't have a relative with disability, but they live in a world with 1.2 billion persons with disability. They need to know that, they need to understand that. So I think that's let's say the power of sport. So that's what we try to do with the Paralympic Games. It's not preach to the converted again. It's not staying close to our own community, because I don't need to tell Tatyana, she knows. I don't need to tell other persons with disability. They know the challenges. They know how it's to live with disability. I think what we have to do with the Paralympic movement is show to the world, and it's try to change this strange planet that we live in.
And Tatyana, if there was a 15-year-old equivalent of you, of course there will be a 15-year-old equivalent of you out there now in Baltimore or anywhere around the world, presumably they won't be having or shouldn't be having the same issues that you did in terms of inclusion.
I hope not. That's what I hope, is just by using my voice to make even just one person's life a little bit better. I mean, hopefully many. And like I said before, it has changed. And so those 15-year-olds out there, I think society is more educated. So that 15-year-old is being more included instead of excluded. But we do have a lot more work to do because we're not touching majority of the 15-year-olds, I would say, like in Maryland or in the US. But we have made a good groundway.
And can I just ask you briefly, I mean, feel free, either of you, to chip in on this one. Do you have views on how WeThe15 might help people with intellectual disabilities or hidden disabilities? Because the disability world seems to be growing all the time. And do you feel that these ideas around inclusion and the WeThe15 campaign can help everybody and not just, if I can use this term, people with obvious physical disabilities?
I think so. I think it's part of that conversation, like we mentioned earlier. When we talk about disability or when someone will talk about it, they talk about their own experiences. I mean, I'm just one person of like a billion people in this world. And so I'm sure that there's another person out there that has a hidden disability and is talking about it as also like part of the discussion. So there are conversations that we see online or amazing campaigns that are talking about, intellectual or the hidden disabilities as well.
That's precisely why WeThe15 is not an IPC campaign. Mm-hmm. Yes, we came up with the idea and the concept, but that's why we partner, for example, with Special Olympics, with Deaf Olympics, and with the Invictus Games Foundation. The Paralympic Movement, it's a movement that has access to physical, intellectual, and visual disabilities. There are other disabilities out there who are not included in the Paralympic movement. So that's why we partner with these other organizations in the world of sport, just to mention sport, to come up with WeThe15. We don't see the world only for the disabilities that are part of our movement. The number of people being diagnosed with autism or in the spectrum of autism these days is incredible. And they are now starting to be included in one international federation of our movement, which is Virtus. So now they are starting to have some kind of, let's say, sport organization or be part of a sport organization that has programs, pathways for them. But it's still, it's still very early days on that one. But yes, I think, we need to, the message is not only about people with impairments that will make them eligible for the Paralympic movement. It's about disability in general, and it's about diversity in general. We have this saying in the IPC that diversity is a fact. Again, whether we like it or not, the whole world is diverse, societies are diverse. Inclusion is a choice. You choose to be, let's say, to have an inclusive attitude as a friend, in my case, as a father, as an employer, as the president or prime minister of a country. Societies choose to be inclusive or not. And this is what we have to do with the Paralympic movement, is help them to make the right decision, of course, in the direction of being inclusive societies. But diversity is not a choice. The world is diverse, whether we like it or not. Some people would like the whole world to be like them. That's not the case.
Do you feel that media coverage of disability sport has a responsibility to reflect disabled people's lives in general, away from the track, away from the pitch? To put it another way, do you think all of this media coverage of disability sport has a role to play in pushing ideas of equality and inclusion?
Absolutely, because people may not know, like if they live in their own community, they may have never seen a person with a disability. And so, but they were able to see it online. I mean, so many people, just everything's on the palm of our hand now. So they're able to see it on all the social media platforms. They're able to see it on, all the streaming outlets for movies and TV. And so the more that content is put out, about disability, the more access that people might be able to do, or they might just happen to scroll upon it. So I do believe that media has a power to play, and really quite an important one, at least for the visibility side.
Andrew, same question to you about media coverage and trying to push some of these bigger themes out there.
It's fundamental because the media is a representation of the world, right? So if you see for example, if it's in, I don't know, TV shows, soap operas, things like that, persons with disability, like you see in the world, it helps you to understand that, look, the different people around the world with different abilities, disabilities, ethnicity, opinion, and so on. I can give you the example of my own country and in Brazil. I remember the first time the games were broadcasted to this country was in Athens in 2004. And before that, you could feel that even talk about disability outside of the circles of disability was something that was not very, I would say, palatable to many people. You know, they would prefer to look the other way. But it was such a success, the broadcasting of the Paralympics in Athens, that 2 years later, in the famous Brazilian soap operas that we have here, the main character was a quadriplegic model, or a model that became a quadriplegic, and she was the main character. So of that soap opera. So she was in front of the whole country, 50 million people every night, and all of a sudden, people started to need to discuss it. You know, and let's talk about it and let's see. And there was the whole rehab process, and of course, in the soap opera, and also kind of normally it has a happy ending, and so, which is not by magic the person not becoming a quadriplegic anymore. It's being productive, being happy, being a quadriplegic. So what I mean is, because the games were on the TV, because Sydney was a very successful games for Brazil as a team, but it was not broadcasted live, so people were not watching it. They were not experiencing it. So yes, and this is only on sport, but I mean, it will be great to see more persons with disability in Hollywood movies, in Bollywood movies, in the Brazilian soap operas, in the Turkish soap operas that are very famous. So we would like to see more persons with disability behind the cameras, but in front of the cameras.
I just want you to look outside of Paralympic sport for a moment, just at sort of the wider world of disability sport that goes on. So, for example, you know, I love my golf, and I see a growing disabled golf tour happening in different places around the world. So outside of the window of your Paralympic Games, do you feel other sports are doing enough to promote diversity? I mean, just to throw this at you, I know you're a big football fan. I am too. I'm not sure the world of football as such does enough to reflect the fact there are lots of other disabled versions of football going on.
I found funny that you said your Paralympic Games, but okay. But yes, I think some other sports that are not included in the Paralympic Games program, to use a very technical way of seeing it, can and should do more about it. But we have seen it, and to be honest, when I go and when I attend some of these events with, you know, hundreds of sport federations, many sport federations, they have a para program, you know, and even sports that are not very well known, like, you know, and I can say a few ones like jumping rope, dodgeball, cheerleading. They all have para program. They are not in the games, and this is the thing, because they are not in the games, they don't have the visibility. And this is what I think they need to try to do. But I also think, because you mentioned football, that on the other hand, we, and me, when I say me, it's the parasport community. We need to be prepared. We have so many national federations out there that could do more. But I think we need to be able, as a parasport movement, to respond also to some of these. When people opens the door, we must be organized in a way that we can say, look, let's go for it. We must be prepared to take on the opportunities, and not sometimes just sit and say, oh, it would be amazing if they open the doors. Sometimes the doors are open, and we are fighting within ourselves and you know, within our own small world, and we don't see how we can get out there.
And the problem is that, like, in order to help like the other sports grow that are not, you know, in the Paralympics, you know, we're still really trying to push like the sports that are in the Paralympics to help it grow in their own countries, because if we still have a problem with that, Andy, too, we're still having a problem of growth with that. You know, it's like, you know, my fear in the future is that I'm going to see dying out of wheelchair racing for female athletes. I'm just not seeing the growth of female wheelchair racers right now in the Paralympic sport. And so we're having, you know, the issues within that. And so I really hope that, once we can solve that, I can really help triangle the sports that are outside of Paralympics.
It's been fascinating hearing from both of you today. If I can just ask you to finish by getting the crystal ball out, maybe looking into the future and thinking about what you would like to see as the legacy of WeThe15, because it's going to continue. There are developments around the Paris Paralympics this summer. What would you like to see as the kind of tangible effects of this campaign in the future?
What I would like out of it and see in the future is more advertisement, more employment, more news, growth of the sport, more discussion, almost that like it's just disability is such a norm that even if someone acquires a disability later, I read online recently that person was ashamed to be part of the disability community. And I don't want that for anyone. I just want them just to be like, yeah, I'm part of the disability community. It's really quite normal. We still do this and this and that and that. So just having that conversation just be almost normalized. That's what I want to see for the future that comes out of the WeThe15 campaign.
And Andrew?
What I would like to see as the outcome is new generations with a different attitude towards disability, and agreeing with Tatyana, which is to normalize disability and put disability into the right context and the right perspective. Disability is a part of who you two, for example, are, but it does not need to define who you are, but it's a part of who you are. We cannot minimize that, but we cannot all label a person and put in a shelf, you are a disabled person, you are here. No, you have so many different characteristics, and being disabled is one of them. But also we cannot minimize that because, for example, we need to have a society that is able to have transport systems that can include everyone. And in order to do that, we need to understand the needs of different people with different disabilities. So it's to normalize it, but as we do with anyone else, understand, not minimize, but certainly not label people with disability and put them in a shelf that segregate. I think that's the word. We would not like to segregate people with disabilities anymore, and people with any specific characteristics. So in summary, it will be generation with a new attitude towards disability. You need the Rosa Parks and you need the Muhammad Alis. So you need the activists, you need the advocates, you need the ones who are in the trenches fighting and trying to change the legislation and going to this. And you need the pop culture also to be there. The people of that caliber to really push these movements forward. And we have them, and they are called Paralympic athletes. So if they are advocates as well, even better. But that's why the Paralympic movement, we are together with the movement of human rights for persons with disability. And I don't think we will be apart. I think that's the way it's going. Whether I'm in the IPC or not, whether this generation that is now leading the IPC or not, I think this is the way forward.
Well, in your different ways, you both have very busy lives at the moment in the lead up to Paris. So thank you very much, both of you, for your time.
Thank you.
No worries.
Always fantastic to hear from Andrew Parsons, the president of the International Paralympic Committee, and Tatyana McFadden, who, there's no doubt about it, one of the greatest Paralympians ever. And what's clear, not just in this episode we've just heard, but all of the episodes in this series, is that for disability inclusion to thrive and the WeThe15 campaign to do as well as it has, everybody involved needs a Paralympic Games to be a success. So we wish everybody out in Paris all the best for the next few weeks to come. The next episode and final episode in this WeThe15 podcast series will look back on the best bits from all of the conversations I've been having. I'll be guiding you through the most memorable talking points and comments made by our brilliant range of guests.